Welcome to The Explainer. Today we're diving into a really fascinating working hypothesis. What if the ultimate national security asset isn't a spy, but an elite social scientist? We're going to look at how the production and transmission of psychological knowledge might actually be utilized by the state, specifically through the career of management theorist Michael Maccoby. We're going to examine the available public record to understand how influence operates, not in the shadows, but right out in the open.
All right, to start things off, we need to challenge some of your immediate assumptions. Because, when I say intelligence asset, you're probably picturing a Hollywood spy in a trench coat, right? Dead drops, clandestine meetings in the rain, stolen microfilms, all that stuff. But the reality of statecraft and national security, well, it might look a lot more like a corporate boardroom, a university lecture hall, or even a government HR seminar.
And that brings us to a crucial definition for our investigation today. An intelligence asset is a person whose access, expertise, influence, or institutional position may be useful to government objectives, whether or not they're actually a formal spy or a clandestine operative. It's really about having specific, highly specialized knowledge and mobility that the government desperately needs to understand and ultimately shape behavior.
Section 1. The Social Scientist Profile. Rethinking espionage versus influence.
The contrast here is absolutely stark. On one hand, you've got your traditional operative. We're talking total secrecy, espionage tradecraft, operating completely off the grid. But on the other hand, you have Michael Maccoby. He was an entirely overt organizational psychologist, a public intellectual who moved incredibly comfortably between academia, business, and government. He wasn't stealing secrets. Instead, he was providing this profound understanding of human behavior within massive bureaucratic structures.
Consider the perfect alignment between his skills and what the government actually needed at the time. To manage Cold War social change, Maccoby offered psychoanalysis and anthropology. When they desperately needed domestic bureaucratic reform, he brought in labor and productivity studies. And for training executives in the CIA and the State Department, he provided cutting-edge leadership theory. He basically specialized in character, motivation, and authority, which, if you think about it, are the exact tools you'd need to understand and shape institutional behavior without appearing to engage in any sort of overt political direction.
Moving on to Section 2, a timeline of influence, 5 decades of government touchpoints.
Crucially, this wasn't just some one-off gig. His influence literally spanned an incredible 5 decades. Back in the 1960s, his early social psychological fieldwork was supported by the Public Health Service. Then, in the 70s, he got deeply involved with the Department of Commerce. By the 1980s, his touchpoints expanded outward to the State Department and the CIA. And, kind of amazingly, this pattern continued all the way into 2019 with leadership work connected to the Indian Health Service.
Let's zoom in a bit. In the late 1970s, Maccoby wasn't just observing things from the outside. He was deep inside the Department of Commerce, heavily involved in their project to improve work and management. And he actually helped design and implement a system that led to productivity improvements, technical innovations, and even a reported collapse in worker grievances. So he was directly analyzing and actively reorganizing federal institutional behavior.
Following that major success, he essentially became a vital conduit for Congress. Between 1979 and 1981, he conducted a study for the Joint Economic Committee on the American work ethic, and he even testified before the House Science and Technology Committee. He was taking this deep, complex psychological theory and translating it into policy-relevant language, right during a period of intense economic anxiety, deindustrialization, and institutional malaise. He was actively telling policymakers, hey, here is how the human factor actually impacts national innovation and strength.
And his institutional mobility was truly global. By the 1980s, Maccoby was working with the State Department's Bureau of Administration on teamwork and bureaucratic reform. But he didn't stop at internal management. He also acted as an overt public intellectual overseas, lecturing in places like India and notably in Santiago, Chile, right before a major democratic transition plebiscite. Operating under State Department auspices meant he could travel as a leadership expert, communicating U.S.-favored ideas about democracy and modernization to foreign elite audiences, all in highly sensitive political environments.
Now, this next one is a massive touchpoint. A declassified CIA reading room document actually lists Maccoby in connection with an executive development core course. He was scheduled to discuss his quote-unquote model of leadership in America, so his frameworks were being brought directly into the national security bureaucracy to help shape the thinking of top intelligence executives. And again, this doesn't mean he was a spy. It just means his organizational and psychological theories were considered absolutely vital for intelligence agency leadership development.
All right, Section 3, the operational profile, how the asset functions.
Think for a second about the HR seminars, the management consulting, or the leadership workshops you might have sat through at your own job. Now imagine those exact same tools being deployed to shape federal policy and Cold War diplomacy. This operational profile shows an asset whose true value comes through commissioned studies, invited testimony, and expert panels. He provided expert interpretation of social character, he shaped federal managers, reformed bureaucratic culture, and acted as a socially legitimate public channel for ideas that were highly useful to U.S. influence and institutional reform objectives.
Which brings us to Section 4, gaps in the record, what the dossier doesn't show. So we have to ask, if he was this deeply involved with the intelligence community, and his ideas were being utilized by national security institutions left and right, why is the paper trail so incredibly unconventional? What exact pieces of the puzzle are we missing to fully confirm the mechanics of this relationship?
Well, let's be absolutely clear about this. There is no smoking gun here, no security clearance, no covert tasking documents, no clandestine personnel file at all. There is literally no evidence of a traditional case officer relationship in any of the available public materials.
We are also missing exact contract vehicles in payment structures for his highly documented Commerce Department work. There are no separate USIS embassy cables or audience lists for his overseas lectures, and the specific sponsoring agency for his National Academy of Public Administration panel work remains totally unidentified in the declassified snippets. Because of all this, our working hypothesis relies entirely on his overt, functional utility to these agencies, rather than some sort of secret operational identity.
And finally, Section 5, the modern intelligence asset, soft power and expertise.
It really all comes down to this one quote from the source material. It says, "His apparent role was not primarily secret operations. It was the production, transmission, and application of psychological and organizational knowledge useful to government, foreign policy, and national security institutions. The true value of an intelligence asset might just be their ability to openly provide the exact knowledge that a government needs to understand its citizens, influence foreign behavior, and even reform its own internal bureaucracies."
We spend so much time looking for the spies in the shadows that we might actually be completely missing the architects of influence standing right there at the front of the lecture hall. So I'll leave you with this. Is the ultimate intelligence asset simply the person teaching our leaders how to lead? It's a question that completely changes how we view management theory, social science, and national security entirely. Thanks so much for joining us for this explainer. Keep questioning the structures around you.